Honorable Khan.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Monsieur le Président, à cette heure si tardive, j'aurais préféré évidemment intervenir dans un environnement plus serein, avec des collègues des deux côtés de la Chambre, peut-être plus numériquement plus importants, mais je pense, moi, que c'est un manque d'égard vis-à-vis de la Chambre et tout le monde ici présent, pour ceux qui ont le pouvoir de décider à quelle heure la session terminera, ont pris la décision de laisser les débats continuer jusqu'à une heure aussi tardive que ça. Bien sûr que vous êtes là, le quorum est suffisant pour me permettre de faire ce discours, de faire mon intervention, mais comme je vous dis, je n'aurais pas souhaité à n'importe quel autre membre de la Chambre, pendant des discours aussi importants que les débats budgétaires, d'intervenir à une heure aussi tardive et avec autant de membres n'étant pas présents dans la Chambre. Comme dit mon ami, avec une audience aussi clairsemée. Mais en tant que parlementaire, puisque c'est mon tour de m'exprimer, c'est avec beaucoup de plaisir que je le fais, Monsieur le Président. Je me suis déjà exprimé sur le budget en dehors de la Chambre. Je profite donc aujourd'hui, ce matin, de l'occasion qui m'a été donnée de m'adresser à vous et à mes amis de la Chambre pour élaborer davantage sur mon analyse et mes appréhensions quant aux propositions du budget. J'ai écouté, par politesse peut-être, j'ai écouté le ministre des Affaires étrangères, l'intervenant qui a fait son discours juste avant moi. Ben, pour moi, c'est un honorable illuminé qui a fait ses commentaires. Je ne vais pas lui répondre, Monsieur le Président. J'aurais préféré donc venir directement à ce que j'ai à dire. Et je le dis d'emblée, sans équivoque, pour moi, ce budget est un budget qui manque d'audace, qui manque de tonus, Monsieur le Président. Je ne vais pas être philosophique comme M. Lassunaraido a été. Je suis un homme terre à terre et je vais m'exprimer concrètement sur ce que je comprends, l'impact du budget et les conséquences des mesures budgétaires au niveau de la vie du quotidien de notre peuple. Donc, ce sont des remarques très politiques que je vais faire. Et comme je disais, pour moi, il n'y a aucun doute que ce budget vient dans un contexte précis. Il reflète l'état d'esprit d'un gouvernement qui n'a pas su oser. C'est pour moi un budget incohérent, insuffisant pour relancer notre économie. L'honorable ministre des Finances et l'honorable Premier ministre auraient dû profiter, il a raté une occasion de rééquilibrer les grands axes de notre structure économique et en vérité, il ne s'attaque pas aux bases macroéconomiques de notre structure. D'une part. D'autre part, un budget qui prétend introduire des social measures, mais en vérité, des social measures largement insuffisants, qui n'auront aucun impact réel sur le quotidien de ceux qui sont censés bénéficier, et j'y reviendrai. Tristement, Monsieur le Président, les chiffres et les données que nous avons démontrent clairement que les principaux indicateurs économiques se sont détériorés au courant de l'année financière. Je vais peut-être répéter ce qui a été dit avant moi, mais je n'ai pas de choix. La croissance réelle du PIB, estimée par le ministre à 3,9% pour cette année financière, était prévue à 4,1%. L'investissement global prévu à 18,9% s'est plafonné à 17,6%. L'inflation prévue à 2% a atteint 2,2%. L'exportation des goods and services, prévue à 48,2% du PIB, est restée à 44% du PIB. La dette du secteur public, qui a été l'objet de beaucoup de commentaires déjà dans la Chambre, prévue à 52,8% du PIB, a grimpé à 66,1%, pour toutes les raisons que l'on sait et sur lesquelles je ne m'attarderai pas. Monsieur le Président, le déficit budgétaire reste toujours relativement élevé et au lieu de l'avoir ramené à 3,3% comme prévu, il atteint 3,5% pour l'année 2016-2017. En montant absolu, le déficit budgétaire se chiffre à 900 millions de roupies de plus que prévu. En termes de performance économique, Monsieur le Président, les chiffres donnés démontrent que l'économie a stagné et qu'aucune relance économique a eu lieu. Comme preuve, 1,2 milliard de roupies en moins ont été collectés en termes de VAT. Et s'agissant des taxes revenues, 1,1 milliard en moins que prévu ont été collectés. Tout ceci est vérifiable dans les estimates qui ont été circulés à tout le monde. Sur le chapitre de underspending ou de sous-utilisation des fonds de notre budget de développement, seulement 69% des fonds alloués ont été dépensés. Alors qu'en 2013, par exemple, des fonds alloués, 83% des fonds alloués avaient été dépensés. Ce qui démontre aussi l'incompétence et l'incapacité du gouvernement d'implémenter les projets annoncés en grande pompe dans le budget précédent. Monsieur le Président, je ne vais pas m'étaler davantage sur tous les pourcentages, tous les chiffres. Le secteur textile, venons sur la production industrielle, le secteur textile en particulier a régressé. Comme nous le savons tous, l'ancien ministre des Finances, M. Lakshminarayalu, nous avait promis à l'époque une croissance économique de 5,3% pour l'année 2015-2016, 5,7% pour l'année 2016-2017, un investissement global de 24,8%, des exportations de biens et de services de 52,8%. Tout ceci n'était que des promesses. Quant à l'investissement privé, il a été bien inférieur de celui de 2012 et il sera toujours bien inférieur en 2017, il sera toujours bien inférieur. En 2012, Monsieur le Président, l'investissement privé a été de l'ordre de 17,5 du PIB. 2012, 17,5. 2013, 16,2. 2014, 14% du PIB. 2015, 12,6% du PIB. 2016, 12,8% du PIB. Et 2017, il est prévu à rester à 12,8% du PIB. Nous voyons donc la chute de l'investissement privé. Quelle est la conclusion donc, Monsieur le Président? Que l'honorable ministre des Finances n'a atteint aucun de ses objectifs. et nous pouvons sans équivoque arguer que par rapport à l'exercice du budget précédent, il a été une véritable contre-performance. Il est également évident s'agissant du secteur de l'exportation et en termes de la production industrielle, nos espérances sont restées au-dessus de nos prévisions. En effet, Monsieur le Président, en 2016, l'exportation de merchandise a baissé si drastiquement qu'elle a financé seulement la moitié des importations de nos biens. Therefore, Mr. Deputy Speaker, the last budget did not fuel the economic engine, nor did it set the foundations for the country to propel itself into a new era of development. And the reasons are, as anticipated, that the Honourable Minister did not address the structural weaknesses of the economic foundations and the macroeconomic fundamentals. Neither did he take appropriate measures or implemented the deep-rooted reforms to address the serious imbalances of our economy. Hence, unfortunately, the Minister of Finance never drove the country on the path of economic recovery. The indicators worsen because the Honourable Minister failed to do what he pledged last year, that is, to improve the fiscal health of our economy by means of strict fiscal discipline. Comme je vous ai dit, Monsieur le Président, ce budget que nous a été proposé est en d'autres mots fade sur le volet économique, tant il manque d'inspiration et frappe par son manque d'ambition, que ce soit en termes d'investissement privé, d'exportation ou dans le secteur offshore. Nous sommes frappés par l'inconscience du ministre par rapport à ces trois secteurs, et j'y reviendrai au cours de mon discours. Therefore, it is in this context of the degradation of the socio-economic context of the country, including the unprecedented level of public debt, that this budget is being presented to this House. Et pourtant, nous le savons, Monsieur le Président, pour devenir un pays à revenus élevés, il est impératif de générer une croissance économique plus importante que 4% et un taux d'investissement d'au moins 25% du PIB. Et ce qui manque cruellement dans la formulation de ce budget, en vérité, et je lisais quelques jours de cela M. Yanni dans son analyse du MCB Focus, il disait exactement ce que je voulais dire. Je le cite, « Des réformes structurelles plus ambitieuses dans divers domaines pour que le pays puisse réaliser une croissance de 5% et favoriser la création d'emplois soutenus et l'adoption d'une panoplie de mesures de restructuration économique qui va grandement aider à rehausser la performance macroéconomique. » Fin de citation. Mais le plus grave, Monsieur le Président, c'est qu'aujourd'hui, l'île Maurice, notre pays, nous faisons face à de nouveaux défis. Et les règles du jeu ne cessent d'évoluer. Le Brexit, l'abolition complète du filet de protection pour le sucre, avec la libéralisation des quotas en Europe au profit des betteraviers. Le retour au protectionnisme avec l'arrivée du président Trump le nouvel ordre mondial. Et pire, au niveau du global business, nous sommes confrontés avec le risque de l'érosion de la base d'imposition et le transfert de bénéfices, c'est-à-dire l'avènement du BEPS, du MLI, le Multilateral Instrument, et du GAR, la démarche de l'OCDE et de l'Union européenne, et par le biais des pressions qu'ils nous imposent et qui nous feront perdre beaucoup de nos avantages compétitifs. Voilà donc les multiples défis qui vont substantiellement peser sur notre économie durant les années à venir. Monsieur le Président, Dieu seul le sait comment nous surmonterons toutes ces difficultés. Et tout ceci doit nous donner la chair de poule, doit nous effrayer, Monsieur le Président. C'est pourquoi, pour moi, ce budget est une grande déception. J'avais moi-même cru qu'après 2 ans et demi de retard en termes de développement économique, 2 ans et demi d'instabilité politique chronique, je parle de la désintégration de l'alliance Lepep, de la démission d'un de ses ministres, M. Badin, après une cascade de scandales, de multiples cas de fraude et de corruption qui ont éclaboussé les proches du gouvernement, les innombrables cas de favoritisme et de népotisme qui sont devenus légendes. J'étais convaincu que le nouveau Premier ministre allait renverser la vapeur en proposant un budget qui jetterait les bases solides d'une île Maurice moderne, tout en instaurant un nouvel ordre économique, moral et social. Mais il n'y a eu absolument rien en termes de propositions pour combattre le gaspillage des fonds publics et décourager les irrégularités au niveau de l'État. Rien en termes de réduction de dépenses de l'État, même au niveau symbolique, en termes de baisse des allocations pour les ministres. Rien, absolument rien, pour donner l'exemple, pour embrigader la population, pour dire à la population, tournons une nouvelle page, envisageons l'avenir avec plus de confiance et de sérénité. Malheureusement, ceci n'a pas été le message de ce budget. Business as usual, Monsieur le Président. Au contraire, the measures announced are a rehash of the same strategy, which has in the past budgets of this government or other governments proved to be sterile and of no lasting effect. This is why, on a deeper analysis, we can see how this budget is deeply flawed, with no strong foundation to succeed and containing no necessary measures to stimulate the economy. Let us take one example. Bringing the tax rate from 15% to 3% is insufficient to stimulate exports. And I will explain why in a few minutes, Mr. Speaker. The same reasoning applies as far as the SMEs are concerned. Our exports have been declining. We are importing more. We have not created sufficient jobs in the export manufacturing industries. And the prospects are bleak. Not a single manufacturing export firm has opened its doors this year. Our firms are no longer competitive. Our export model is no longer working because we have lost our international competitiveness. And why is that, Mr. Speaker? Because the incentives we have provided will be ineffective because our present model itself has to be reviewed. It is because of the inbuilt contradictions of our model. And let me explain myself, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Can we have a successful financial sector, new economic sectors with high valued added jobs, with innovative products, a technological and sophisticated financial industry, and at the same time, a model utilizing low technology and labor-intensive operations? This is precisely the point that those who prepared the budget missed. In fact, Mr. Deputy Speaker, we need to revamp our model. We must have a better understanding of real sector economics, monetary policy, exchange rate policy, and how the economic transmission operates. With the financial sector growing robustly, huge foreign exchange flow into Mauritius, and hibernate for a significant number of days. Then we borrow 500 billion USD. The foreign exchange reserves build up. Currently, foreign exchange reserves are the equivalent of 9.4 months of import. This is clearly on the high side and bears considerable pressure on the exchange rate. When the rupee appreciates, the Mauritian entrepreneur manufacturing low value-added product based on labor-intensive and low-technology production method finds it harder to sell its product on the international market. It is therefore futile giving an incentive of 3% tax on profits when no sales or hardly any sales take place. In some way, the growth and success of a revamped financial sectors or a new innovative high technological sector are incompatible with the low technology manufactured experts, Mr. Speaker. If we wish to revamp our manufacturing sector, we need to understand the basics, distill lessons from the past, learn from the experience of others, and examine empirical studies before adapting them to a Mauritian context. Textile is a low-value product and has completed its product life cycle. It is ripe for delocalization to other countries like Madagascar, Comoros, Mozambique, or Kenya. It is a process already in progress, as we know. But, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that is what I mean by rethinking the model. We need to shift to sectors that require higher technology and bring higher revenue. To be fair, there has been in the budget a timid attempt to innovate in terms of artificial intelligence and robotics, which are necessary conditions but not sufficient. Here was the opportunity for the Prime Minister and Minister of Finance to take a comprehensive outlook. How do you introduce robotics or digitalize the economy without training and a skillful pool of high-caliber achievers? One would have expected more resources geared to the universities, import of high-caliber lecturers from the world's best universities, and scholarship to our best students to go to the best universities of the world. The budget has nothing of the sort. So we will continue to wallow in the middle-income trap, Mr. Speaker. Our growth matrix for the next 20 years has to be different. Our economy must mature, must depart from the strategies of before, make of Mauritius a reliable center for high value-added activities in a global supply chain. We shall have to move from value adding to value creation and establish Mauritius as a leading center for value creation in the business strategies for foreign companies. To illustrate what I mean, Mr. Deputy Speaker, it is perhaps worthwhile to look at the strategy that a country known to all of us, Ireland, which has positioned itself today as a recognized center, which was a few years ago an agricultural economy, but which has positioned itself today as a recognized center of excellence for innovation and development in pharmaceutical, biopharmaceutical, and chemical supply, thereby becoming a location of choice for the launch of new products. The pharmaceutical sector in this country has become a major contributor to Ireland's economy by paying more than €1 billion in corporation tax in 2008 and employing over 24,000 people and continuing to grow steadily, Mr. Speaker. Ireland succeeded to attract some of the world's leading pharmaceutical companies. Ireland did not focus its strategy on competing directly with low-cost economies, on cost grants alone. It secured its competitive advantage through smarter ways of doing business, including better use of technology, innovation, cost control, upgrading the skills of its employees, and making them flexible and adaptable to change in technologies. Keeping in mind, Mr. Speaker, that manufacturing alone will not be enough to ensure the long-term presence of the industry. Research, development, and innovation drive the transformation process forward. Therefore, Mr. Deputy Speaker, let us look at the incentives given to stimulate the pharmaceutical industry here in our country, because we all subscribe to the idea of creating a pharmaceutical sector. We need to learn from our past experience and use our knowledge to build the future. This is what the budget has totally ignored. The pharmaceutical industry was first mentioned as a potential sector in 2006, Mr. Speaker, when the Labour government was in power. 12 years later, the idea lingers on without anything substantial, and I fear this trend will persist for the years to come because, unfortunately, government seems to have no idea how to proceed. What do we see, Mr. Deputy Speaker? There is no site so far, no industrial park, no industrial pharmaceutical village created. A first step would have been to identify a site of some 50 acres, provide it with a state-of-the-art infrastructure, create a faculty of chemistry or pharmacology, provide priority scholarship, to create a critical intelligent pool of skills specialized in the sector, use the excess liquidity to enable easy accessibility to finance, as was done in the past. The budget is vague, without a purposive sense of direction, without any planning how to launch this sector. While a tax holiday is a stimulating factor, until and unless firms start producing, the tax incentive is a sterile incentive. If we wish to launch a new sector, Mr. Speaker, we need a comprehensive package adapted to the situation so that we can convince the Indians, the Swiss, or the French to come here, as we did in the case of the EPZ, with a greater degree of professionalism. Here was an opportunity for Honourable Prime Minister to impress on the Indian government, to hold roadshows with the Indian pharmaceutical entrepreneur to set up firms in Mauritius. Here was an opportunity, Mr. Speaker, to divert part of the land credit to finance the pharmaceutical sector. Here was an opportunity for the Prime Minister to use his prerogative to formulate a policy and persuade the IMF, as we did in the past, to agree to use a line of credit from the Bank of Mauritius to finance this industry under concessionary terms. Mr. Speaker, the other sector, which according to me required much greater attention, is another sector which has been referred to by other members of this House. I am talking of the ocean economy. This budget devotes 8 paragraphs to the ocean economy. But all dealing with fishing and low to medium level training. Fishing, according to me, is a medium technology, low wage seasonal sector, which will not allow us to graduate to a high income status country, a contradiction with the objective of this budget. This is another ministry responsible for the ocean economy, which unfortunately has showed no clout so far, no clear purpose, groping in uncertainty. This budget is silent on the potential of this fairly high sector, high technology sector, Mr. Deputy Speaker. The Ministry of Ocean Development has missed its opportunities. Until now, we can see no master plan. Here was an opportunity to apply high technology to exploit the sector. Other countries in Europe and elsewhere, the US, Japan, and India are either experimenting or have put in place floating windmill farm. Even Germany has set up a windmill farm to cater for 250,000 households. We should have approached KfW, Siemens, or we could have approached Statoil from Norway to explore this potential. The ministry has no such plan. We could have exploited the cultivation of seaweeds as an input for the pharmaceutical industry or cosmetic industry to produce high-value goods. The initial project of creating a land-based industry remains valid. We can replicate, Mr. Speaker, the experience of Hawaii with the support of Nelha and Makai of Hawaii. This Ministry of Ocean Economy has been so far, unfortunately, slow and lethargic, more involved with special interests such as oyster or the exploitation of fisheries than caring for the future of this country, that it is time so much that there is time now for a thorough revamping of the role and potential of this ministry. Let me now come to the financial services sector, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Again, to my mind, the budget has failed to focus properly on this sector. With so much potential, but facing so much enormous challenges. In 2019, the present arrangement expires, and some of the incentives that made our country so successful will come to an end. Worse, Mr. Deputy Speaker, the government of the day has committed to replace the deemed foreign tax credit for global license one company. This DFTC regime has served our country well for almost 20 years and has accounted for the successful growth of the financial sector. And government has now agreed to review and replace this regime. We may ask ourselves, Mr. Speaker, what business is it for the European Commission to sit on judgment on non-EU member states' tax regime? And what will happen? What will the European Union do if we decide not to change the DFTC, Mr. Deputy Speaker? Of course, greater pressure will be put on us, will be exerted on us. Of course, we could be perceived as a tax haven, but as a sovereign nation, why did we not pursue further discussion with the European Commission concerning the reform of the DFTC in order to come up with solutions and other possible options that might be feasible? Mr. Deputy Speaker, although Mauritius manages, historically speaking, to rise to every occasion, to every circumstance, it is vital we stay alert and get prepared to address the challenges in this sector. But honestly, Mr. Deputy Speaker, the problems in this sector are difficult, but they are not irremediable. But we must be cautious that the blueprint, for example, which has been proposed in the budget, does not become a subtle way to put the problem on the back burner. Mr. Deputy Speaker, according to me, what is smothering the global sector, what is one of the main problems of this sector, is the legal instability and the over-regulation in this sector. The amount of FSC circulars and the amount of conventions for mutual exchange of information that we have been signing lately has made Mauritius to be an over-regulated jurisdiction. More importantly, the excessive application or interpretation of the rule by the overzealous officers of the FSC has made obtaining a license un parcours de combattant, unless you have some political connection at higher level of the state. Investors, Mr. Speaker, do not want to go through these onerous procedures when other well-established jurisdictions like London, Luxembourg, have expedient and simpler licensing procedures. Should the same investor opt for a domestic company instead of a GBC1 company, he would not have to suffer all these investigations and verifications. Regulations is important. Don't worry, I'll come to Mr. Alvaro in a few minutes. Regulation is good, but over-regulation can stifle the sector, Mr. Deputy Speaker. The new tax of 3% on profits earned from export by manufacturing companies should have been extended to the export of services also. This would have encouraged many professional companies, such as consultants, design, pensions company, risk assessors, intellectual property companies to be located to Mauritius, with this tax of 3% only on profits earned. Mr. Deputy Speaker, besides the leveling of the playing field, our global sector needs supportive sectors to thrive. These include not only international law firms, but also financial houses for more asset management capabilities. Our banks should be able to broaden their activities to provide trade financing, custody structured finance, pensions management, intellectual property, and international leasing facilities at simpler terms and competitive costs. To encourage these entities to set up in Mauritius, the licensing procedures should be simplified, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and incentives should be provided to attract them. Reporting, excessive license costs, and restrictions on amount of funds that can be remitted to Mauritius through bank transfer should be made easier. Therefore, this is why, Mr. Deputy Speaker, this important sector is today a sector without a sense of direction. For nearly 2 years, there is no substantial chief executive. Can such a vital sector grow, expand, and inspire in these present circumstances? This sector, as we all know, was blasted by the most abominable scandals that shook the country, with serious implications in terms of economic impact, international image, and governance issues. It lost 7 places in Wall Street Heritage Index, ranked 16 in Africa, when only a few years it held the place of pride. It takes years to build the image of a country, but only a few minutes to destroy it, Mr. Speaker. And we find it strange that the Honourable Minister went on public air, stated he couldn't find competence in this country. And this was an insult, in fact, to the thousands of Mauritians who built this country from scratch. Does it make sense, Mr. Speaker, for a country that relies so strongly on the private sector to have such a great dominance of public servants on the board of the FSC, which is the second most important financial institution? Is it good governance that the financial secretary should chair the FSC and his deputy is the first deputy governor of the Bank of Mauritius? In which incestuous world are we living, Mr. Speaker? Doesn't it strike anyone in this model of democracy, where we pride ourselves on the rule of law, that we are creating potentials for conflict of interest? And in so doing, are we sending the right signals to foreign investors? Mr. Speaker, it took years to get Mauritius out of the OECD blacklist. Today, we are accepting Alvaro Sobrino, considered as a toxic investor and on whom investigation is going on in Switzerland. Being the Minister of Good Governance, and I say to the Minister, although he is not present, it requires great responsibility towards the country. No Minister of Good Governance could continue to hold office when licenses are granted to an investor with a reputation like Alvaro Sobrino. No sensible person, Mr. Deputy Speaker, leave alone our political divide. No sensible person will dare to deny that Mr. Sobrino affair has diminished the credibility of this country. How many times, Mr. Deputy Speaker, in the past, the FSC announced it wished to fill the post of Chief Executive Officer. It made many advertisements, called candidates for interview, but stayed action. Other vacancies at the FSC, an institution responsible for over 12% of the economy, have not been filled for nearly 2 years. How then are we to produce a blueprint that will chart the future of the financial services sector. All this doesn't send the right signals in terms of seriousness of purpose. This sector, Mr. Deputy Speaker, has become too important to be managed with so much levity and in such an amateurish manner. Mr. Speaker, before I comment on a few other issues in the budget, I would like to say a few words on what is now commonly termed as the social measures. Let us take the measure of a drop of 10 cents on a loaf of bread, Mr. Deputy Speaker. To me, this measure has virtually no impact. Assuming a person consumes two loaves per day, this allows him a saving of 6 rupees per month and 72 rupees a year. This is such a negligible proportion on the income of people that it has really no impact in alleviating poverty. Just as the decrease sur la farine, Monsieur le Président. No impact really on the day-to-day life of the average Mauritian. The negative income tax, Mr. Deputy Speaker, to me, it is a positive measure, but we must be careful. It is a redistributive tool. But in so doing, in proposing this measure, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I agree with the trade unions when they argue that this is a way, an indirect way of subventionner le patronat. Because true it is, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I have said it myself, many friends in this House or the trade unions have said it, we know the large number of employees in this country in the private sector who earn less than 9,000 or 10,000 rupees, nearly more than 100,000 in our labor force in the private sector. But, Mr. Deputy Speaker, was it the role of the state to give an increase in wages? Because this is what it is, in fact. It was subventionner le patronat. It was also, Mr. Deputy Speaker, covering up government institutions like the NRB, which in fact had failed, not only under this government, but under past government also, the past government, for updating. This is the role of the NRB, for updating the wages of the different sectors of the workers in the private sector. By failing to do so, Mr. Deputy Speaker, for years, as I said, we know that there have been sectors in this country where the RO, the remuneration orders, have not been updated for 8, 10 years, sometimes, Mr. Deputy Speaker. So this is why il y avait un rattrapage à faire in terms of wages, in terms of salary of certain categories of workers in the private sector. So by providing, therefore, this increase of the negative income tax, of the amount that has been proposed in the budget, nous avons vu le barème, Monsieur le Président. By coming up with this proposal, in fact, as I said, government was in fact substituting itself or covering up what the NRB had failed to do in the past. The solidarity tax, Mr. Speaker, is a measure I applaud. I agree with the measure. It is another measure of redistribution. It is a measure of social justice. But when I think about it, Mr. Deputy Speaker, the Honourable Minister should have gone further, should have thought about other measures, providing for more social justice in this country. I give you one example, Mr. Deputy Speaker, which you will easily understand, and also all the members of this House. We know what land transfer tax is all about. Land transfer tax is a tax which all of us pay when we sell a property. We pay registration duty when we acquire, and when we sell our property, it is 5% tax on the value declared in the title deed. We all know that. Now, I have thought about that for a few years, Mr. Deputy Speaker. A small man sells his house, sometimes his CHA house, for 500, 600, 700,000 rupees, 800,000 rupees. Sometimes he has to send his son somewhere, his child, or is sick, or to university, or he wants to sell his house to share the money between his two kids, his two children who are grown up now. For whatever reason, he's selling his property, which is not of much value. Aujourd'hui, 700,000, 800,000 rupees. He has to pay 5% on that, excluding notary's fees and so on. 5% sur 800,000. Ça fait combien, Monsieur le Président? 40,000. 40,000 rupees. 5%. 10% sur 800,000, c'est 80,000 et 5%, c'est 40,000. 40,000 roupies pour quelqu'un qui vend sa petite demeure, pour des raisons quelquefois difficiles. C'est beaucoup, Monsieur le Président. He has to pay that. Now, think of another scenario. This gentleman who has means, he's selling his yacht, his Porsche, for 4 million, 5 million rupees, 3 million rupees. Of course, this is not an immovable property, but he doesn't have to pay anything, 1 single cent. All these yachts in our blue azure waters, Mr. Speaker, I have nothing against yacht owners or Porsche owners, but is that justice in our society when you think about it? Either we do two things. Either we impose a 5% tax on these people who have all these big limousines, all these yachts, and who can sell one today and buy another one in 1 month. We impose a 5% tax, or we must have thought about the possibility of excluding these people who are selling a small house of 500,000 rupees, giving them, allowing them, Mr. Deputy Speaker, the liberty not to have to pay this land transfer tax. It is unjust, I say it again. Why should a poor man, when he sells his house pour 500,000, 600,000 rupees, payer 5% le gouvernement? And why should this rich man, who is selling his yacht for 8 million rupees, or 6 million rupees, or his car 4 million rupees, 3 million rupees, doesn't pay 1 single cent to government, to the coffers of the state? Mr. Speaker, I think we must reflect upon this. And there are other cases, examples which if the Honorable Minister wanted to play Robin Hood, and it's a good thing that we play Robin Hood because we have been elected by the people, and we must seek for each and every opportunity, Mr. Speaker, sir, to do justice, to redistribute wealth in this country. We have nothing against people who have acquired wealth legitimately, licitly, but this is precisely the task of government, to redistribute wealth, Mr. Speaker. So, as I am on this score, I want also to make an appeal to the Honourable Minister of Housing, who is not present, about an appeal which many of us have made in the past concerning the housing sector, concerning the asbestos houses, Mr. Deputy Speaker, where there are thousands of them around in this country. The EDC houses which were built after Cyclone Carol or Alex in the 60s, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Some of you were not born during those days, but we remember in what circumstances these houses were built, of asbestos and of CIS, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Many of these people who bought these houses at that time, who were renting it, in fact, who were leasing it from the CHA at that time, have now become owners, but they have become so old that they cannot pull down and rebuild and reconstruct a new house of concrete today, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I have made so many appeals to the previous government, to Honorable Sudan also, you can check from Hansard, and to come up with a scheme. There is so many there is so much money now which is available and being pumped in the social housing sector. I would have again appealed to him to come up, to conceptualize, to design a scheme pertaining to these asbestos houses, which are, as we know, a threat to the health of the occupiers, and to come up with a scheme to allow them, to give them the possibility of pulling down their houses. In fact, they don't have the right to pull down their houses. It is the district council or the Minister of Environment which is supposed to do that. But to give them this possibility of living in a new and in a safer home, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I will... Still early, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I promise I would finish at 5:30. Mr. Deputy Speaker, India and Agariga. Let me also say a few words on this issue. We all know, Mr. Deputy Speaker, of the history of this special relationship between our two countries. India has been our leading trade partner, still is, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and we know in terms of donor country what India has represented to us, to little Mauritius. We all have to be respectful of this relationship. We all have to be careful not to cause any harm or distress to this relationship. And we must be realistic today and be alive to the fact that India is a growing economic and military power, and that Mauritius falls into the geopolitical sphere of its influence. I was reading a few days ago, Mr. Deputy Speaker, somewhere on the net, an article entitled "Towards Strategy, Economic Cooperation between India and Japan." And in this article, the author was writing about this partnership between these two countries to counter, Mr. Deputy Speaker, China's influence in our neighborhood. I'm quoting, on the maritime front, New Delhi has been wary of the growing number of Chinese infrastructure projects in its neighborhood, especially in the Maldives, Mauritius, and Sri Lanka. India has watched China's presence in the Indian Ocean grow with some concern. And India, as the Republic of India, is tied up with Japan, Mr. Deputy Speaker, in this common project of countering the People's Republic of China's influence in the region and in other regions of the world also. So, Mr. Deputy Speaker, having said this, the respect that we owe to this relationship, the realization that things have changed, we are living in a new era of geopolitics, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Yes, but the geopolitical strategy of India cannot be above the socio-economic interests in Mauritius. And I'm sure even the Indian authorities and leaders are aware of this. Yes, India has its geopolitical strategy, but Mauritius also has its own socio-economic interest. Of course, we are too small to wield influence how to change the course of international events, Mr. Speaker. On the one hand, as I said, we have the Chinese one belt, one road, the Silk Road diplomatic policy of economic and political policy, We know, Mr. Deputy Speaker, we have the issue of the American presence in our region, Diego Garcia, and its obsession to police the world and protect the oil route. We have the British with their double standard, Mr. Speaker, still perceived as wielding their imperialist ambitions. The French presence in the Indian Ocean is also quite visible. India, Mr. Deputy Speaker, will in all logic and legitimacy seek also to exercise its influence. But at the end of the day, we as Mauritians and as a sovereign nation, we need to keep our territorial integrity. It may be a good diplomatic and strategic ploy to woo another power, to play one another, to bargain, to set up, to come up with bargaining mechanism in our endeavor to recoup Diego Garcia, to retrieve that territory which is ours. But we need to be cautious, Mr. Speaker. That is why we must be aware as a Mauritian nation of what exactly is going on in Agariga. The Prime Minister has a moral right to inform the nation, and he cannot escape not being transparent. He must play the card of transparency. He must answer the questions of the nation. Why a runway of 3,600 meters when for years Plaisance Airport, with an impressive tourist industry, had a runway of only 2,850 meters until 1987. In the interest of the whole nation, such questions have to be answered. The Prime Minister, the Honorable Prime Minister, has to spell out what he has agreed with the Indian government. He must not act in any way to be responsible if suspicions are created in the minds of certain sectors of our population, mistrust in the minds of the population with regards to India's presence in that part of the region. En politique, this is what Mr. Rocard once said, and it has always stuck in my mind. En politique, il faut faire ce qu'on dit et dire ce qu'on fait, Monsieur le Président. So much so for the issue of Agariga in India, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I come to another issue which is very close to my heart, Mr. Deputy Speaker. It's about the drug issue. And I have no doubt, when I'm talking about the drug issue, I have heard a few members on the other side of the House and on this side of this House, and I have no doubt that unanimity prevails in this House and in the whole country, Mr. Deputy Speaker, with regard to the extent that this scourge is devastating our social fabric and our youth in all four corners of our country. Unfortunately, again, besides announcing for the master plan, which has already been announced in a cabinet communiqué at the beginning of the year, there is hardly anything new on the chapter on drugs. There is an announcement with regard to new equipment, modern and sophisticated tools, logistics, and so on. This was already announced in last year's budget. But to come back to the ravage de ce fléau, Monsieur le Président, I just read an article, I'm sure you all read it in Le Mauricien a few days ago. The article was entitled « Drogue synthétique, l'Ouest touché en plein cœur ». And a few days afterwards, there was another article in L'Express this time. I'm sure you've all seen it. Pourquoi Maurice se drogue? To come back on the article in Le Mauricien, l'Ouest touché en plein cœur. This is what I'm quoting from one line. Les habitants des régions de Bambou et de Rivière-Noire assistent impuissants à la recrudescence des drogues synthétiques et ses dégâts dans leur quartier. Depuis quelques années déjà, ils voient certains de leurs jeunes se détruire. Ils ont constaté que même des adultes plus âgés se laissent tenter par l'expérience destructrice de ces produits. End of quote. Indeed, Mr. Speaker, c'est une épidémie qui ronge toutes les régions du pays. So much so, Mr. Deputy Speaker, because in my constituency there are many of these foyers infested by these dealers, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that I know of localities, but of course I won't name it, where citizens are now selling their properties at a loss in order to flee that precise neighborhood for their own security and the future of their children. Selling their house which they had bought with so much sacrifice and blood and sweat, selling it at a loss just to flee away, just to get away from these areas for l'avenir of their children who are growing up. Mr. Deputy Speaker, this is, we can, by reflecting on what I just said, Mr. Deputy Speaker, imagine how deep-rooted is this flavor in our country, deep-seated. And how can we win this war, Mr. Deputy Speaker? We all want to win this war. And sometimes the social workers and the experts say it is a lost battle. Indeed, repression, year in and year out, our government and all the governments in the world are budgeting millions and millions of rupees or pounds or whatever exchange, foreign exchange, whatever money you can call it. We are budgeting millions and millions of rupees or dollars to repress this ill. But like the mythic dragon, it keeps on rearing its ugly head, Mr. Deputy Speaker. How will we win this war? Monsieur Honorable Buddha talked about Iceland. I read also what is taking place in Iceland. But one, and I will come to it in a few minutes, not to repeat what you said, but one of the best ways to hit the mafia, Mr. Deputy Speaker, is to strike them at a place, at the spot where they can be weakened the more, their financial resources, their pockets. This is why in the past we have tried to destroy, we, I mean all of us in this house, all governments, have tried in the past to destroy this flourishing and lucrative illicit trade by legislating, for example, to seize the property of drug traffickers. Let us admit it, this is a measure that did not yield the expected results. But there is another suggestion that we have made on this side of the House, Mr. Deputy Speaker, to the Honorable Prime Minister, to government. Government should do like what Mr. Modi has done, demonetize the Mauritian rupee, issue new notes like the Indian Prime Minister did, so that all the millions and millions of banknotes, which are the rotten fruits, heaped, amassed, and hidden by these public poisoners, should become worthless, useless, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Yesterday I read in the newspaper, entitled L'Express, I'll just show you the title, 3 milliards dans des boîtes de carton. You have all seen it, I'm sure, Mr. 3 millions, pardon, sorry, 3 millions. Yeah, I'm speaking too much of milliards. Yeah. Drogue et blanchiment, 3 millions chez un marchand de fruits. Les limiers ont fait main basse sur 6 boîtes de carton dans lesquelles étaient dissimulés plusieurs liasses de billets. Montant total, 3 16 100. Cet argent proviendrait d'un trafic de drogue, end of quotation. This is what l'Express is saying. Therefore, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I urgently appeal to the Honourable Prime Minister to review his decision. This decision to issue new banknotes was in fact proposed by the central bank for other reasons, not necessarily for the reason I'm talking about, to issue new banknotes. But I will appeal to him, begging, Mr. Speaker, to review that decision before the mafia has time, you know, what they can do or what they are still doing. Fortunately, I've heard the measures have been taken. Voila. They go and to the money changers and so on, Mr. Deputy Speaker. But I understand that also the control has also been extended there. So much the better. But we must, Mr. Deputy Speaker, reflect seriously on this possibility. In terms, I was asking the question, pourquoi la drogue? Why, Mr. Speaker? There are many social workers working on this issue. But why our youth is today has become so much a prey, Mr. Deputy Speaker, to these dealers, to these public poisoners, to this mafia. Why la drogue is doing so much ravage? There's one answer to it, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Of course, we have all reflected on this. We all of us have our own analysis. We have got our own ideas. In fact, Mr. Deputy Speaker, notre jeunesse aujourd'hui souffre d'un mal, un mal-être, Monsieur le Président, qui les envahit, une souffrance intense qui les étreinte. C'est une des raisons principales, je ne vous dis pas la seule raison. Il y a un problème psychologique, Monsieur le Président. This is why the article, the reference of my Honorable Minister Buddha, the success story of Iceland on treating addiction among teens, can be emulated, can be copied in our country. Mr. Deputy Speaker, the percentage of 15 and 16-year-old in this country who are addicted to drinks fell from 42% to 5% in 2016. The percentage who had ever used cannabis is down from 17% to 7%. Those smoking cigarettes every day fell from 23% to just 3%. This is the experience of Iceland. Surveys were conducted. Alarming findings were detected. Almost 25% of the youth, 16, 18, this age, was smoking every day. 40% consuming alcohol in the month that the survey had been carried out. And the experts who were conducting the survey, the inquiry, identified precisely what was the cause of all this souffrance, what was the cause of so much addiction. The analysis revealed, Mr. Speaker, clear differences between kids who took up drinking, smoking, and other drugs, and those who did not. Some factors emerged, and they were made to participate in organized activities, sport, 3 or 4 times a week, spend time with their parents during the week, as Honorable Buddha was telling us, feeling cared, feeling loved in their schools or wherever they were, not being outdoors in the late evenings. And before that experience, there had been all kinds of substance prevention efforts and programs, Mr. Deputy Speaker, but these programs were not working. Then came the different approach. And a new plan, national plan, was introduced, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and it was called Youth in Islands. Laws were changed. It became illegal to buy tobacco under the age of 18 and so on, and alcohol. And parents were encouraged to attend talks on the importance of spending quality of time with their children and talking to their kids. This is what happens today in our modern society. We don't even have time to talk to our kith and kin, talking to their kids and keeping their children home in the evening. Curfews were imposed, as Honorable Buddha reminded us. And this is why I said, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I think we are not pointing fingers at our social travailleurs sociaux, the NGOs and so on, but I think repression is not the only answer, Mr. Speaker. And government has to stand to its responsibilities. State funding for sport, music, art, dance, to give these kids the alternatives. This is true, Mr. Speaker. When I go to one of my cities and when I see so much drugs being sold, and I realized that there are no sport facilities in that area. What will these young people do in the afternoon, in the evening, or even during the day? Most of them have no SC certificate. They try to find a job, and we know, question of adapting, no work culture. So they are easy prey. And once we don't provide them with all these facilities, Mr. Speaker, this is an alternative to feel part of a group, to feel good, rather using alcohol and drugs. And these kids from low-income families, they receive the help from the state, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I know it's perhaps an ambitious project for us, but we have to rethink about ways to curb the drug scores, Mr. Speaker. But more importantly, and I will finish on that, on the drug issue. Mr. Deputy Speaker, ce qu'on devrait faire aussi, c'est la mise en place d'un service d'addictologie dans le pays, que l'on n'a pas, Monsieur le Président. Nous témoignons aujourd'hui cette augmentation significative des troubles liés à ces nouveaux produits de synthèse, les synthétiques, et aux complications graves menant jusqu'à la mort de certains consommateurs, Monsieur le Président. Nous avons entendu beaucoup de cas. Nous devrions mettre en place d'urgence un service spécialisé pour la prise en charge des troubles d'addiction. Qu'est-ce que c'est que l'addiction, Monsieur le Président? L'addiction est une maladie complexe et une discipline médico-psychosociale, Monsieur le Président. Et eu égard de la nette progression des addictions, l'État doit mettre en place cette facilité d'hospitalisation en addictologie, Monsieur le Président. Ce que j'ai appris, nous avons un seul addictologue à Maurice, Monsieur le Président. Nous n'avons qu'un seul addictologue à Maurice. Donc, et comme nous le savons tous dans notre pays, l'addiction de toute substance est possible. L'alcool est un produit hautement consommé, le rhum local, le tabac importé, le cannabis est consommé, Monsieur le Président. Donc, voilà toutes les raisons de l'addiction. Et donc, il nous faut émuler l'exemple de Iceland et aussi réfléchir sur mettre sur pied ce centre d'addictologie. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I'll very, very briefly on the Betamax affair. Monsieur le Président, en 2010, 7 ans de 7 ans de cela. It's becoming late, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Donc 7 ans de cela. Seven years ago, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I was a member of the opposition, and I remember there was a Labour and MSM government, and I think PMSD also. Yeah, Labour, Bleu, Blanc, Rouge was in power, Mr. Deputy Speaker. And I remember this was the first question which was asked on the Betamax affair, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Je vais vous dire la date exacte. This was on the, I will ask honorable friends to bear with me. Come on, Gany. Because I will be finishing in a few minutes. Le 10/8/2010, Monsieur le Président, the question was about Betamax. It was a PNQ by the leader of the opposition then, Mr. Béranger, and the question was about the Betamax project. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I asked this question, and it was the first time that it was asked in this House. Can I ask the Honourable Minister, he's talking of procurement practice and so on, since we have to give a guarantee of 15-year cargo to Betamax Limited, and this project amounts to nearly 1 billion of rupees, the expression of interest was issued in March 2008, and the Public Procurement Act came into effect in January 2008. We are dealing with a major project. Doesn't the Honourable Minister think that this transaction should have been monitored by the Central Procurement Board, and everything should have gone through this board? The STC should have never issued directly an expression of interest and thus acted in breach of the PPA, which came into effect in January of 2008. From that time, Mr. Deputy Speaker, many of us had doubt on the legality of this transaction. I asked the Honourable Minister whether a proper procurement exercise had been conducted. Mais seulement, everything was bulldozed at that time. And it was Honourable Sudan who was answering this question. He was then the minister responsible for trade and industry. After the elections of 2014, unfortunately now we are in 2014, l'Alliance Lepep comes to power, portée par l'euphorie de la victoire, Monsieur le Président, et dans l'ivresse d'un mandat électoral sans équivoque. Le gouvernement croyait que tout était permis dans le royaume du soleil. L'essence de notre état de droit s'affaiblit. C'est affaibli, Monsieur le Président. Moi, je pense, j'ai écouté le ministre ce matin, et j'ai relu le discours de M. Ganga, le ministre, il y a une semaine de cela. Pour moi, il n'y a pas de doute que des négociations auraient pu aboutir à une meilleure solution. Je ne pense pas que the route of negotiations was exhausted, was fully utilized, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Je pense que des négociations auraient pu aboutir à une meilleure solution, mais seulement, malheureusement, c'est faux de cette victoire peut-être. C'est une attitude condescendante qui a prévalu ces jours-ci. Et cette attitude, Monsieur le Président, a même continué pendant tout le long du mandat depuis 2014 concernant l'affaire de Betamax. Je vais vous dire pourquoi. Parce que je vous cite une question parlementaire que j'avais moi-même posée à l'honorable ministre le 5 avril 2016. Whether he will obtain information from the STC indicating if the prior advice of the State Law Office was sought and obtained before the termination of the contract, if government has been apprised of any indemnities that will be payable to Betamax, if there is a possibility to renegotiate the price, if an arbitrator mediator has been appointed, the profile and the current status of the arbitration. Le ministre, Monsieur le Président, ce jour-ci, avait réclamé son droit de silence. Quand il aurait pu nous donner certains renseignements. This is what he said, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I want to give the information, but I cannot. Honorable Utim asked him, I can understand the confidentiality clause and so on, but who is representing the government and Mauritius? And how much this is costing taxpayers? Ça aussi? Je suis sûr que vous aurez répondu, you would have answered, Mr. Honorable Attorney General. And this had nothing to do with our defense and so on. But the Honorable Minister again refused to give any information. And a few PQs were asked in the past year about this Betamax, and this was shrouded in a mystery. The whole issue, the whole subject matter was shrouded, as I said, Mr. Deputy Speaker. And aujourd'hui, le pays nous aurons à payer cher cette arrogance et cette désinvolture. Et ce matin, l'honorable ministre a réitéré a réitéré son exploit, à son tour maintenant de manque de transparence, en refusant de répondre à la question concerning the law officer's opinion, n'est-ce pas? This is what you said, because I tried to have a copy of the reply you gave, but I read it from Le Mauricien. I hope they gave the correct version. But, Mr. Speaker, I wanted to make a point of order this morning, but there was so much brouhaha and pandemonium in the House that I didn't have time, and I'm not usually allowed to ask supplementary in this House, which are reasons well known to everybody. Mr. Deputy Speaker, this is what Erskine May says about law officers' opinion. But you said, you want me to read?
I said there are two independent legal advice. We never advise on the
No, you said the advice came from the law officers and also from private lawyers. And this is why you didn't want to disclose. Therefore, this is why I can read from Erskine May Parliamentary Practice, page 443, Law Officers' Opinion. Therefore, the opinions of the law officers of the Crown, being confidential, are not usually laid before Parliament, right, cited in debate or provided in evidence before a select committee, and their production has frequently been refused. But, if a minister deems it expedient that such opinions should be made known for the information of the House, the Speaker has ruled that the orders of the House are in no way involved in the proceeding. So it depends on you. So you had to take the decision. But I think that in the interest of transparency, Honorable Attorney General, you should have given the opinion, and this is what Erskine May says, and Erskine May never errs, Mr. Speaker. Donc, Monsieur le Président, Betamax doit nous servir de leçon pour tout le monde, pour ce gouvernement et pour l'ancien gouvernement. Mais le gouvernement doit adopter une attitude responsable pour que notre pays ne doit pas être taxé comme un État voyou, un État renégat, un rogue state, Mr. Deputy Speaker. In fact, we have all again read what an expert in the course of an interview said regarding the Betamax affair. What are the consequences for Mauritius if it decides not to pay? The answer was, not paying an international arbitration award would invariably damage Mauritius' reputation as an investor-friendly country and ultimately its economy, a country which is heavily dependent on foreign investment and on support from foreign lenders and international organizations would send the wrong signal by refusing to comply with an international arbitration award. So, Monsieur le Président, moi, c'est ce que j'avais à dire sur le passé. Mais pour l'avenir, I think, Mr. Deputy Speaker, aucune transaction de l'État entre l'État ou une de ses entités, comme le STC, et une autre personne morale ne doit contenir des clauses de confidentialité, ne doit voiler le contenu du contrat, Monsieur le Président, parce que c'est une transaction financée par l'argent public, relevant du droit public. Il ne peut être un secret face au grand public, Monsieur le Président. C'est pourquoi je suis convaincu, Monsieur le Président, que pour l'île Maurice, qui est une démocratie mature, mûre, avec toute l'expérience riche que nous avons en termes de good governance et de transparence, après le saga Betamax, je suis convaincu que tous les contrats entre l'État et les sociétés privées, les IPPs, les autres promoteurs, sans distinction, incluant les promoteurs des établissements hôteliers sur les pages géométriques, tous ces contrats doivent sans distinction être déposés sur la table de l'Assemblée nationale. It is a reasonable demand that I'm making, Mr. Speaker. I think we all need that. Even next time when you will be in the opposition, and there will be another government. I'm sure that will help you. All these transactions involving les finances publiques doivent être déposées sur la table de l'Assemblée. Monsieur le Président, je termine. J'avais dit à 5 heures, 3 minutes. À l'aube, Monsieur le Président, et je termine, à l'aube de nos 50 ans, il est grand temps de moderniser notre République et ses institutions. À commencer par notre Constitution et notre Parlement, Monsieur le Président. C'est pourquoi moi et mon ami Barbier, nous avions proposé la rapatriation de notre Constitution, qui fut rédigée au Whitehall par des Britanniques, nous fut octroyée par ces Britanniques par le billet d'un Order in Council, Monsieur le Président, annexé. Notre Constitution n'a jamais été votée par cette auguste Assemblée. Plusieurs anciennes colonies nous ont précédés. Nous devrions suivre leur exemple et ceci nous permettra, dans le même souffle, de dépoussiérer et mettre à jour notre Constitution en introduisant des clauses qui reflètent les changements sociétals que Maurice a connus. La limitation du mandat du Premier ministre, l'épineuse question du transfugisme en particulier, la révocation des élus par leur mandat dans des circonstances exceptionnelles et le Second Generation Rights, Monsieur le Président. Ça, c'est pour la Constitution. Il nous faut, dans le cadre de la célébration de nos 50 ans d'anniversaire, le Attorney General doit présider un comité pour réfléchir sur the advisability of this House voting a new Constitution with new clauses pour update our Constitution. Et quant à notre Parlement, Monsieur le Président, il nous faut moderniser nos standing orders, introduire le comité système pour favoriser plus de transparence, pour sanctionner des ministres qui refusent de circuler les réponses des questions qui sont restées sans réponse à cause du temps. And this, Madam Speaker cited the relevant standing order. The ministers are bound by standing orders to circulate the answers. Il nous faut de la transparence, Monsieur le Président. Et finalement, pour moderniser ce Parlement, vous savez que ce que nous avons besoin, Monsieur le Président? And I'm finished on that. Introduire la langue du créole, Monsieur le Président. Monsieur le Président, nous, bisins capables de cause créole, pour que la population capable de comprendre nous ce qui va passer dans ce Parlement-là. C'est une question de justice, Monsieur le Président. C'est une question de respect pour nos populations. Est-ce que vous connaissez, Monsieur le Président, en 1977, Sir Anirudh Jagnat, qui était leader de l'opposition à l'époque-là, il amène 3 motions privées. 3 motions privées, Monsieur le Président.
Pour que standing orders would apply, and therefore I would invite you to continue your speech in English or in French.
I have the solution, Mr. Deputy Speaker, because Standing Order 5 provides that we have to speak in French and English, Standing Order 5. But we have another standing order whereby we can suspend any standing order with the will of the House, of course, with the pleasure of the House. So I would have moved for, and this motion doesn't need notice. So that I could have moved that we suspend standing order 5, and you allow me, the House allows me to talk in Creole. But, okay, I'll finish. Monsieur le Président, nous avons aujourd'hui un dictionnaire en créole. Cette langue a son lexique. Elle est enseignée dans l'école, dans les universités, au MAI. Des chercheurs d'université sont en train de travailler sur un logiciel pour corriger le créole sur le Microsoft Office, Monsieur le Président. Donc, cessons d'avoir des préjugés contre la langue créole, Monsieur le Président, que les majorités de Mauriciens utilisent. Puisque nous sommes tous d'accord, Monsieur le Président, je demanderai donc au Premier ministre, à travers les ministres présents, de venir avec un statement et d'informer la Chambre et le public, la population, que oui, un comité, un select comité peut être nommé et peut travailler sur toute la question, Monsieur le Président. Monsieur le Président, je termine en disant ceci. Ce budget sera sans doute adopté par le Parlement, compte tenu de la majorité dont dispose le gouvernement. Mais un budget, Monsieur le Président, n'est qu'un exercice comptable, un exercice financier, n'est qu'un exercice économique. L'économie, Monsieur le Président, est le concentré de la politique. Ce dont a besoin l'île Maurice aujourd'hui est un nouveau ordre moral, social et économique. En effet, notre pays a besoin d'une moralisation de la vie publique, d'un nouveau cadre éthique pour ne pas exploser sous le poids de la décadence morale. Notre pays a besoin de compétences, Monsieur le Président, pour ne pas dépérir sous le poids de la médiocrité. Notre pays a besoin de solidarité, de justice sociale, pour ne pas exploser sous le poids des inégalités et d'une pauvreté grandissante. Notre pays a besoin de méritocratie, d'une vraie égalité de chance, pour ne pas sombrer sous le poids du népotisme, du favoritisme et de passe-droit. Monsieur le Président, face aux attentes d'une population en désarroi, une jeunesse sans espoir, réunissons nos forces patriotiques pour construire un nouveau Maurice. Merci.
Monsieur le député.